Shabbat Shalom. It is nice to be standing upright. I missed you last week, and thank you for your notes and expressions of concern. In the sermon, I am going to talk a little bit about self-harm, and so if you need to remove yourself in order to take care of yourself, please do so. Chapter 14, verse 1 of the book of Deuteronomy, Banim atem la Adonai Elohechem. You are children to Adonai your God. Lo titgodedu, velo tasimu korcha ben enechem lamet. Do not make gashes, and do not make a bald spot between your eyes for the dead. This 13th century French philosopher Gersonides says making gashes and a bald spot between the eyes was shemetz avodah zara uminhag komreha. It was a pagan mourning custom that was still practiced by some medieval Christians. In 1 Kings, when Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal, we are told they shouted louder and louder, and they cut themselves with swords and knives as their customs had told them to do, and so there was blood all over them. According to Gersonides, just as the previous passages in chapter 13 dealt with cases of an idolatrous city and a prophet in secret leading the people astray to idolatrous practices, chapter 14 begins by cautioning us away from another idolatrous practice, which was making gashes in your skin for the dead. I don't know of another mitzvah in the Torah that is preceded by the phrase, Banim atem la Adonai Elohechem. You are children to Adonai, your God. Why begin the verse that way? The rabbis imagine that God looks down as a parent in heaven and says, I love you. Don't hurt yourselves this way. I don't want you to worship me, and I don't want you to mourn this way. This verse of the Torah truly spoke to me my first summer as director of Camp Ramah in California. It was there that I encountered something called cutting. That summer, it was brought to my attention that an eighth grade girl was cutting herself, not by accident, but on purpose, sometimes with a paper clip scratching the surface, but other times with a knife or a razor blade. Psychologists explain that the kids are not trying to commit suicide, but to externalize a deep pain that they are feeling on the inside. These kids were following an impulse to self-harm that the Torah knew well. Something that human beings thousands of years ago and thousands of miles away did too. Feeling these feelings is, of course, not wrong. Part of the deep wisdom of Jewish mourning practices is that they not only permit, but encourage and even mandate that we give voice to our deep sadness. Rachamana liba ba'e, the rabbis teach, God wants the heart. We can feel frustrated and angry at God. We can despair at life and cry out, and God can contain those feelings. It's often people who cannot. People get nervous, like Job's comforters, when feelings are too raw, when questions get too pointed. John Milton wrote, a man may be a heretic in the truth if he believes things only because his pastor says so or the assembly so determines without knowing other reasons. Though his belief be true, yet the very truth he holds becomes heresy. Jewish tradition teaches us not to fear what others declare to be heresy, but rather to seek truth. The Talmud teaches God's God's seal, chotamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu emet, that God's seal is truth, that there is nothing that God cannot contain. That is true. Grief is hard. Trying to avoid grief or power through it without acknowledging its deep effect on our lives is like digging a channel in the sand at the seashore. Eventually the water will get through. Our sadness will manifest itself in unhealthy ways, in anger at our loved ones, in overindulgence. After Aaron's sons die, God tells him that the priests must not drink wine or other intoxicants when they fulfill their priestly duties. According to one rabbinic tradition, the juxtaposition of that is purposeful. God warns Aaron against masking his sorrow with alcohol. We should give voice to our grief, and yet also Jewish tradition cautions us you can grieve too much, too long. That there are some instincts which should be curbed, not because to feel them is wrong, but because our job is not only to remember, it's also to forget, it's also to heal, it's also to move on. Jewish tradition requires Shiva for 7 days, Shloshim for 30, Kaddish for 11 months, the unveiling of a headstone at a year, Yisker at major holidays in the spring and fall. Such a structure acknowledges the intensity of our loss, and it gives our loved ones the rightful place that they have in our lives and our memory, but it also signals when we should let go and move past the initial intensity of loss so that their memory does not deny our experience of the present, nor define our future. One can grieve too much and make one's loss too much the center of one's life. Time and forgetting may seem cruel, but we may feel the temptation never to marry again, to close ourselves up and never allow ourselves the vulnerability of love and relationships. Such a temptation should be resisted, like making gashes in our skin. Dying with those who died is no tribute to the ones whom we loved in life. Grief can also be selfish. Toward the end of his book, Kaddish, Leon Wieseltier writes how, quote, in the heart of the family there must be a wise alienation. A father, a mother, a son, a daughter, they too can be idols. Idolatry may be nothing more than too much love, which I suspect is why the verse begins, Banim atem la'Adonai Elohechem, you are children of Adonai, or God. Grieve, but don't make an idol even of those you love the most. Wieseltier writes, I am not only my father's son. My soul surpasses my ancestry. My father imbued me with purposes, but my purposes carry me beyond my father. About this verse, Abarbanel thinks that the Amorites and the Moabites gashed themselves because they didn't believe in a world to come. And so when their loved one died, they felt truly alone, abandoned, orphaned. Jewish tradition teaches otherwise. Our loved ones are never gone, and we are never truly alone because we are all Banim la'Adonai Echem. We are all God's children. Rabbi Sager used to teach that we have two jobs on the day of a funeral. One is to bury and to leave behind the body, the physical remains of our loved ones. But the second is to bring with us what Wieseltier calls their purposes, their Torah, their values, the things they stood for. Those things never die. They are eternal. They live on. They are something we all share. We remember. Anim atem. We are all God's. Shabbat shalom.